This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Hello, world, and welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. Today's sponsor is A2 Hosting. I've been using A2 Hosting solid-state hosting solutions for our website at geekleader.com for many years now, and absolutely love their support, their service, and all the features that you get. You get access to cPanel. You get all of the things that you can imagine for a great WordPress experience, including their A2 optimized WordPress, which does extra security checks, extra lockdown. You can lock down your editor file so you can't edit anything inside there. You get alerts whenever there are file changes that are done. You can also do automatic updates, backups, and more with A2 Hosting. So highly recommend it. Go to geekleader.com/A2 to get more information and to sign up for their solid-state, turbocharged speed hosting today. Again, that's at geekleader.com/A2. All right, Geek Leaders, today I'm honored to welcome the new year with our first guest of the new year, Richard Newman, and from Body Talk. He is the author of a couple of books that we're going to be talking about today. One is Lift Your Impact, which is all about transforming your mindset, influence, and how to elevate your work and your team, which is really important for us leaders, especially starting a new year. And that's going to be coming out in the middle of 2023, so we can prime ourselves and get ready for all that, which would be awesome. And we're going to talk about communication, just to be better communicators. One of my goals in 2023 is to become a better communicator, to be more clear, concise, and empathetic with my communication. Anyway, with all that being said, Richard, welcome to the show.
Yeah, great. Thanks, John. Appreciate you having me on.
If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today in your career, and what is it that you're doing over at Body Talk?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think you're just saying there that you're interested in improving your communication this year. I started with that mission back when I was about 16 or 17 years old. So I was in high school, and I realized that my communication skills were not very good. In fact, they were so bad that for my 16th birthday, a friend of mine gave me a book called Body Language, and she said, "You really need to read this. Like, you need to improve what you're doing here." And I read it, and I was fascinated by it, and I thought, wow, this is such gold dust to understand this information. But then I started to think, well, maybe other people are good at communication and I'm not, and I never will be. So maybe I just don't have the natural talent in this space. And, I was very much a shy person. I'm highly introverted. And I didn't realize until much later in life that I'm high functioning autistic. And so I had these three elements sort of working against me there. But I then realized that I wanted to improve in this area. And so I decided that instead of going off to university, which is where all my friends were heading, I applied to go and be a teacher overseas because I knew that would test my communication skills. And I wanted to go somewhere where really people needed my help. And so I ended up going up to the foothills of the Himalayas, which is sort of up in northeast India, where I was living in a Tibetan monastery and teaching English to Tibetan monks, with a big extra challenge of the fact that when I got there, they didn't speak any English at all. So they just spoke Tibetan, Nepali, and Hindi. Wow. And I spoke a bit of French and a bit of German, which wasn't particularly helpful in that situation. And so I had to figure out through body language and tone of voice how to communicate with them non-verbally. And by living with them for 6 months in this situation, I then found by the end of that 6 months, I'd managed to teach them how to speak pretty good English. I'd also learned how to speak Nepali, which was the main language of the town. And one of the major principles that I brought out of that was that what I was really relying on in my body language was congruency, which is a fundamental principle that I encourage everybody to work on as the first thing to aim for, which is that in order to teach them something, so if I wanted to teach them the word excited, if I didn't look excited, and I didn't sound excited, then they had no idea what the word meant. So I could have been saying pineapple and they had no idea. So I had to make sure my body language, my voice, and my words were all going in exactly the same direction. So I had congruency. And by doing so, I was able to communicate. And so coming back to the UK, I kept on studying communication, read every book I could get my hands on, something like over 200, 250 books in that area. I studied acting for 3 years at a London acting school, where I learned how to sort of sit, stand, walk, and breathe in a way that would connect with an audience and bring a story to life and create a character. And then since then, I just really started up teaching communication as a hobby. And that was back 23 years ago. And since then, my company has grown every year to now train, as I think you mentioned, over 120,000 people all over the world. Just by sort of starting small and gradually getting bigger and bigger. And we've created our own original research along the way that was published in the Journal of Psychology.
Wow. So I'm going to back up just a hair, because you lived for 6 months with some Tibetan monks. What was that conversation like with your friends and family that you're going to do this?
Well, I think with my family, they were distraught because they thought, I was an 18-year-old who had never been overseas without my parents before. So to go to such a remote place was something that they were really worried about. And from my friend's point of view, they had a bet running that I would be back. And the longest odds that anybody had put on me was 2 weeks. So they didn't think I was going to last. And so when I got there, I was feeling quite overwhelmed, very homesick, but I knew I had to be there longer than 2 weeks in order to win the bet. And by the time I'd been there for 2 weeks, I was settled in. I knew my routine and things were going well.
Wow. Yeah, that must have taken a lot of courage to to go out there, not speaking the language, and then having to figure it out.
I think it was more on my side. It was more naivety than courage. I think back then I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I mean, even to the point where on the day I was supposed to leave, my dad had to go to the post office depot to find my passport, because I'd applied for a new passport and it hadn't arrived yet, and my flight was leaving in 3 hours. And so they had to sort of fish through the post office depot to get this, and it had the visa in it. And I just thought, this would be straightforward. I get on a plane, I then catch a train, I get a taxi, and I'm in this monastery. And I mean, it took me about 6 days to get to the monastery, going through all kinds of adventures across country, this overnight train, a taxi that went up then through the foothills, where we were passing all these monkeys passing us, staring at us. And I really didn't know what I was getting myself into. But thankfully, all was well. And I encourage anybody who wants to go and travel to India, because it's an incredibly safe place to travel, especially for a male traveler, as I was at the time, male solo traveler. And so, I'd always encourage people, if you feel like doing something, don't overthink it. Just, go ahead and work it out as you go.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. It sounds like you had a great life experience there. And you talked about congruency of being, making sure that your body language and your vocal tonality match the words that you're trying to say. And I struggle with that myself. I'll say something and I'll mean it in a certain way, but I have, some people call it the RBF, resting blessed face, where you don't always look like you're pleasant when you're talking to someone, and they'll think that I'm not as positive. I'm being very positive about, a result. And I think that I'm being negative sometimes because my facial, features don't necessarily match the words that I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is something that I come across a lot. And it's why we work on it so much with our clients, because I very often will go to speak at a conference, and before me on stage is often the CEO and then maybe the CFO. And then I come up as the keynote speaker, and I'll sit there at the back watching these leaders stand on stage, and they'll say something like this. They'll say, hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here today. Thank you so much for being here. We've got a great conference lined up. And I'm just thinking, if you feel excited, tell your face, tell your tone of voice, because people are going to be sitting there otherwise thinking, like, when's he going to break the bad news? Are we all fired? Like, what has he really called us here for? And so that's where you have to have that congruency. The fastest way that we manage to get people doing this is that we'll get them reading children's storybooks. And this has been a revelation in training leadership teams this way, where we will put a book in front of them that you would typically read to a 5-year-old child. And we'd say to them, imagine you've got children in front of you. Imagine it's a children's birthday party, and the entertainer has just cancelled, and all you can think of to do to entertain the kids is to read this book. So read it in a way that's expressive, and suddenly their voice comes to life, their face comes to life, the way that you would if you're expressing yourself to young children, so they get the meaning of what you're saying. And then we take them from there and we say, okay, now let's run your presentation and do it again exactly the same. So you want to put all of that expression in the voice and so on, and they say, no, it's going to be way too much, it's going to be over the top. And we say, just try it this once, And if you get it wrong, it's my fault. And then suddenly this life, this passion goes into their words, which is all coming from them aiming to physically and vocally commit to those words. And sometimes I even say to them, look, imagine you're speaking to my monks. They don't understand the words. So you've got to physically and vocally express it in a way that they would get the mood, they would get the intention and the feeling. And it's a very fast way to suddenly get people to that place of having the congruency.
Yeah. You know what? When I think back on, my career, and I started speaking at conferences early in my career because I wanted to go to conferences, and the company that I was at wouldn't let me go. And I was terrible at it. But after I had kids, I started getting better. And now that you talk about children's stories, that was one of the things. Whenever I read kids, I tried, books to my kids, I tried to put different voices with the characters, and act it out kind of with my voice. And I think that kind of just spilled over into my regular life and my work life, and that may have improved some of my speaking without even knowing it. That's a brilliant thing that people can try and practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to hear that you're doing that. And often we find it's a really simple way in for clients that we work with who have kids, just to say to them, imagine your kids are here right now and go for it. And they go, oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, I do that every day when it's, story time at bedtime. Now, I've got 2 young kids, and I'm still reading, my youngest I still read to every night. And so if you go into that story mode as well, what happens is not just the voice and face come to life, but you suddenly think about the arc of what you're talking about and going on a journey and trying to captivate interest. So it gives you so many different aspects.
Yeah, for sure. So let's say we start practicing that, and we get better at getting the voice tone there. And how do we get our body language in tune? Because sometimes, especially like if we're just exhausted, we're tired from the day, we're stressed out from all the things that life is bringing us at work, and we want to be excited, we want to convey happiness, but we're just tired. How do we get our body in gear?
Yeah, well, the great thing with body language is that we are all born to communicate. We are born to be expressive. So when we're kids, if you watch a kid tell a story, they move their arms around, they move their face around, they move their legs about as well, just in that storytelling zone. And what happens as we grow is that we get certain situations in our life where we may feel rejected, or we may feel criticized, and we start to reduce our expressiveness out of fear of being criticized in different situations. And so when you become an adult, you haven't forgotten how to use your body language. You haven't got to that space where you're not a good communicator. You've maybe just not done it for as long, and so you need to get back into that zone. And so when we get people doing gestures, we're never getting them to do something that is unnatural. It's just reawakening their arms. In fact, there was a guy who I trained who was a head of a record label once, and he was saying that suddenly through the course of a session that I was doing with him, it was like he was reconnecting with his arms for the first time in 10 years by simply being given permission to be expressive. And so again, ways that we will do that is we might get people to read out famous speeches. So these could be presidential speeches or important speeches that have happened throughout history. And I'll say to them, I want you to show me what this means through the size of your gesture. So if it's not very important, you make your gestures small. If it's really important, you make them big. You can use palms up and palms down as well. And this is a fun one to try if people are listening into this thinking, well, what do these different gestures mean? There's some gestures that mean different things in different countries. Like thumbs up means, in India, I learned this the hard way. Thumbs up means, do you want to have a drink? So if someone did thumbs up to me, I'd say, yeah, I'm good. And they'd give me a drink and expect money. But it means different things in different parts of the world. But palms up and palms down means the same thing everywhere. It's an inborn mechanism. And so if you try it, if anyone's listening to this, they want to try. If you put your palms facing upwards in a gesture, this gesture is open. It's welcoming. It sort of says to someone in a conversation, hey, what do you think? Tell me your ideas. It's very open, accepting, welcoming in that way. Whereas if you put your palms facing downwards, it's a closed message, or it says that you're saying an important statement, but you don't want any questions. And so once I get people using those, I think of it like tennis, like those are the forehand and backhand of your body language. So everybody who plays tennis needs forehand and backhand to play the game. And every human being has this inborn way of using palms up and palms down to express themselves. But sometimes we don't realize it. So let's say that you're at a bar and you've had enough. It's time to go home. And someone says, "Hey, do you want to have another drink?" And you decide to go. You give them a palms down without even thinking about it. You go, "No, I'm fine. I'm heading off. Thank you." You do a palms down. Whereas if you are being inviting to someone, let's say you're trying to encourage someone to stay at a party, you might do a palms up and say, "Hey, just stay another 5 minutes." You're doing a palms up. So these are things that we do naturally every day, but it's often when we get into work that we start to then close down how much expression we're allowing ourselves to have. And so all we're really doing with people is allowing them, giving themselves permission to be the version of themselves that they would be when they are feeling completely free. And when you start to do that, once you've got the palms up and palms down, or if you like the forehand and backhand of body language going, you then become more free to use your instincts to gesture in all kinds of different ways that express different emotions or give clarity to a message or talk about how a story is beginning and the middle and the end of the story, the trajectory for numbers and statistics. And suddenly the whole place, the whole visual aspect of your communication can come to life. And it really helps the person that you're speaking to, not just visually giving them clarity on what you're saying, but also adding emphasis to your words, because every time we gesture, there's extra muscles being used in our body that add emphasis to key words in a sentence. So I encourage people to get started with this when they are by themselves, just practicing ahead of a meeting. And then when you're in a meeting, allow your instincts to move. I often say to people, gesture on the first word of a sentence. It's like starting a car, getting things going, getting things into motion. And once you've done that, you've given your body permission, and you'll find that it will start to gesture more freely and give you more of a visual impact.
So let me ask you this. If you're on a Zoom call, how important are these gestures and movements? Because a lot of times, it's difficult to communicate. It's, we live in a remote society these days where a lot of our meetings are now remote, where they used to be in person in conference rooms. How important are these body languages and vocal tonalities when it comes to Zoom?
Yeah, so a couple of ways to think about this. So firstly, you might have a Zoom call where cameras are off. So sometimes some different companies do that. And even if that's the case, if the other person can't see you, then, like we're doing an audio call at this point, but I'm gesturing anyway. And part of the reason I'm doing that is there was some great studies done at the University of Chicago going back a few years. And they wanted to see, do gestures make a difference to mental coherence? And they took a group of mathematicians and they said to half of the class, they wanted them to sit on their hands while they answered some maths questions, some oral questions. And then the other half of the class, they said, we want you to get your hands and make lots of gestures while you think about the answer, while you're giving us the answer. And they found that the group that sat on their hands got lower results, and the group that was moving their hands got higher results. And in various studies they were doing, they did a whole set of studies. They put this together in a conclusion to say that moving your hands, that there's so many nerve endings going from your hands to your brain, that it stimulates your brain. It allows you to speed up your thought processing and therefore allows you to give more effective answers. So even if people can't see you, I encourage people to gesture. Whereas when they can see you, the big challenge with video calls that people do on Zoom or Teams and so on is most of the time, the way that people have framed the shot is that it's cutting them off from the shoulder downwards. So even if they are gesturing, the other person can't see it. So I'd say to people, take a look at the way that a news anchor is framed or a TV presenter is framed. You'll often see them on TV where the frame of the shot goes just below their hands. So just below sort of elbow height, if you like. And that's the way you really want to set up your webcam if you're speaking from home or from the office, is so that people can see your hands in shot, so that you could do a palms up or a palms down or different gestures, and you can indicate to people what you mean. And this can be so important because I'm sure everybody has been in that situation where you're on a Zoom call and you ask people a question and there's no answer. And part of the reason that happens is because there's no visual cue for them to answer. So if you're in a meeting, you gesture to someone and say, "Hey, Bob, what are your thoughts on this?" And they can see your hand reaching out, palms up towards them. And they think, "Oh, okay, you want me to answer? I'll answer." But when you're doing this on a Zoom call and you say, "Does anyone have a question about this?" they can't see the gesture unless your gesture is in shot. So I always say to people, make sure that you've got your camera far enough back and at the right height. So it's framing your shot so that people can see all of your head, all of your shoulders, and all the way down to your hands, so that you're nicely framed and able to really interact in the same way that you would do. What we're aiming to emulate is being on the other side of a boardroom table. That's the kind of shot that you want to give people, not just giving them sort of from the chin upwards, as some people do.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So that gives some good actionable things that we can, us as leaders can take on right now to improve our communication. In your new book, you talk about mindset, and we're in a new year. So a lot of people are looking at, ways to improve themselves. Why is mindset so important when it comes to leadership?
Yeah. So, I mean, talking about it in terms of it being a new year. So here we are, what is it, in the second week of January? And we know that statistics show that about 9% of New Year's resolutions stick. So that means 91% of them fail, and they fail pretty quickly. And so part of the reason for that being the case is that people sort of set a goal and there's nothing behind it. There's no real sort of foundation being laid for that as an intrinsic motivation that will keep people going every day. And so often these resolutions are set too because of outside forces, people saying, oh, you should do this more, or you should do this less. Maybe their friends, maybe their family, maybe their colleagues have said, hey, you should really move in that direction. But if it doesn't come from them internally, then it's not going to stick. And so there's a few things that people can do if you want to transform your mindset, not just for New Year's resolutions, but if you really want to set a path and increase your success in a situation, then there's a couple of key areas I work on with people. And the first piece I talk about is values. And this is a part this is talked about by so many people to the point where some people don't really understand what it is, or maybe they're a bit tired of hearing of it. And so you often get this in a company where people have their values chipped into granite or chipped into marble in the foyer of the headquarters, and nobody really knows what those values are or what they mean, and they don't really live them out every day. So when I talk about values, what I mean is there are principles that we all have in the way that we live our life that move us in one direction or another. And if you want to figure out what your principles are, this is one way of checking it that many people can relate to. So imagine that you could get $10 million and you could get that in the next 7 days. And then I said to you, but to get there, you have to steal it. Now, for many people, most people, they'd run into a principle there where they go, well, hang on a second. No, I want that. I might want that for myself, for my family, or so on, or to give to a charity. I might want it, but I'm not willing to run past that principle of honesty.
Right.
Or say if I said to you, well, you can get $10 million in 7 days, but to do so, you can't see your family again. They'd say, well, I'm not going to do that because I have a principle of looking after my family, or being close with my family, putting family before money, or whatever it is. So the way to figure out your values is often to think, what do I want in life, and what boundaries am I not willing to break in order to reach that goal? And so that will start to tell you what your values are. Now, when you know what your values are, you don't actually need to achieve the goal in order to feel good, because you can wake up in the morning and you can remind yourself, these are my core values. I am somebody who cares about being a good father. I'm somebody who cares about empowering my clients. I'm somebody who cares about supporting charities. And when you remind yourself of those values, you're giving yourself internal validation. Before you've met anyone, before you've interacted with anyone that day, you've got this internal validation built up. And it's important to do that early on, because often what most people will do when they wake up in the morning, they set their alarm clock on their phone. And so the first thing they do in the morning, before they're even truly awake, they reach out, they open their phone, they turn off the alarm, and they see they've got 20 notifications. They're going through social media. And then what they start to do is to look out for external validation. Like, how many likes did I get? How many comments did I get? How many emails did I get? Do people think I'm worthy enough of sending me a message? That sort of thing. So it sets us in the wrong course immediately. If you can start your day from internal validation, who am I? What am I proud of doing? What choices am I proud of making? I'm proud of making these choices through my values. Then suddenly you're setting yourself a course on internal validation. And there's a great study that was done on this, a set of studies, again, done in Germany, I believe, which is called the Triasocial Stress Test by Cresswell and Sherman. They put together a whole series of experiments where they found that when people have that internal validation, it increases their sense of confidence and well-being. it can improve their performance in a presentation or a test, and also improves the reaction that you get from other people, how they perceive you, whether or not they feel that they would want to work with you, because you're not needy in that situation. You're not trying to impress or getting stressed out by external stimulus. You've got that positive internal stimulus. So that's one of the key areas of mindset I like to work on with people. So they've got a strong foundation within them from which they can then go and set goals, think about a vision, and pursue a mission.
Yeah. So when you're talking about this mindset and, saying who you are, should you be talking about more like who you want to be? Like, for example, I was not a very, empathetic leader when I first became a manager. I was very kind of, we're going to do it this way. I don't really care, why you want to do it or what you're, how you're feeling right now. And I've learned that that's not a very good, first, it's not a good person, but it's also not a good way to be a manager or a leader. And it's not the way to get the best out of people. So I wanted to become a more empathetic leader. So I kind of envisioned myself as being more of what I wanted to be and setting my mindset into who I wanted to become, not just who I am now. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. So what it sounds like happened for you there is that there was a values shift. And we all have this. We might have sort of 10 or 20 values that are guiding our decisions day after day. And sometimes there's a shift in the priority of those values. Some become suddenly much more important to us. And occasionally a new one comes into the mix that we hadn't even considered before because of a revelation we have, a transformational experience that we have, or some personal development we've gone through that comes in. And so in your case there, one of the key values for you to focus on, and I generally say to people, stick with 3 because you can always hold 3 in your mind. It's very easy to connect with. So a shift for you there would have been going from perhaps being focused on a value of achievement to going to a value of empathy. And so to make sure that you're driven by empathy, it's important that you don't think it's something outside of you. The very fact that you thought this is something that is now really important to me shows that it's an internal value rather than external. And the key part of this, though, to connect it with your mindset is rather than think, I want to be more empathetic, you can think one of my core values is empathy. And you then need to give yourself proof, where you need to think back all the way through your life and think, where has empathy been a positive force in my life? Has empathy helped me guide an important decision? Has empathy from other people been important to me? Where has this shown up and been something positive? And once you do that, then you give yourself a very strong connection to that value. So rather than feeling like you want to reach it, because then you'll think, okay, I'm not empathetic, so your identity is in a mismatch. You want to make sure that the value is associated with your identity, because in the end, we all fall back to living out our days with what we believe is our identity. And that's where, like, if people do a physical, like, weight loss or bodybuilding transformation, and then like 6 months later, it hasn't lasted. Part of the reason for that is their identity didn't shift. Their identity is however they were before, and so they bounce back to whatever that was. And so if we really want to have lasting change, we need to shift our perception of our identity. So to give people an idea around this, a few years back, I didn't do any sort of working out or exercise in particular, apart from going for a walk. And this friend of mine said, hey, let's start doing triathlons. He really wanted to get into shape. And so I thought, well, I don't really swim. I haven't done any swimming for like 15 years. And now I'm going to go into a lake and swim. And so what I started to do is I bought a wetsuit and I hung it up on the door of my office. So every time I left my office, I would see this wetsuit and I'd think to myself, I am a triathlete. I am a triathlete. And so that got me to the spirit of thinking, okay, this is part of who I am. I then stepped that up from when I was doing marathon training. I went from never having run more than 5 kilometers to within a few months running a marathon, 42.2 kilometers. And the way I got into the mindset of that was thinking, I am a marathon runner. That's part of my identity now. Rather than I'm trying to be one, I am one. And so you then make choices each day that allow you to be congruent with who you believe you are in your identity. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And I think the same thing is once you change that mindset of who you are, it makes it a little bit easier. And I guess you're right. It's going into that internal, reward, that intrinsic value versus, someone telling you something.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. One of the other things you mentioned, so we've talked a little bit about values and vision. But what about archetypes?
Yeah. So there's a great area around mindset that I like to work on with people to help them expand their potential, because there's so many people who end up in a situation where it could be in a relationship or it could be at work where they feel burned out, where they think, I just can't keep going on like this. And the other part of that is that they tend to say, and often I'll find this when I'm coaching people, maybe around communication or something, they'll say, look, this is who I am. The behaviors that I have right now, this set of behaviors that I've had for the last week or so, that's who I am as a human being. And actually isn't. So for no matter who's listening to this, whatever behaviors you've had for the last 7 days, that doesn't define your full potential. That's just who you're choosing to be right now. That is and sometimes it can be a rut that people have gotten into with a limit of behaviors and patterns that we're using each day. And then we get to the point where we think, well, that's all that I am. And it's important to expand beyond that, because sometimes when we're in a job where, let's say that people expect you to be the organized person, the hyper diligent person, and that expectation is put on you for a long time, sometimes you feel the need to think, I just don't want to work here anymore because I'm fed up of everybody coming to me to be the organizer and the diligent person, and I just need to be somewhere else. And they'll leave and they'll suddenly thrive. And they don't even need a rest or a holiday. They just go and they find a place where that identity is not expected of them. And so one of the ways to start to expand this is that I talk about these archetypes in this new book, Lift Your Impact, where I talk about 6 archetypes that people can tap into that allow them to expand their range and their experience of being alive. And so these 6 archetypes are the shield, which is more of a warrior archetype, the sovereign, which is more of a decision maker. Then you have the sage, which is more of an earthly wisdom, the servant, someone there to lift up others. You've also then got the sprite, which is our playful sense within us, and showtime, which is that sense of being in the spotlight. And for anyone listening to this, there might be one of those where you think, I think I'm being that one at the moment. And a lot of archetype systems say, you're only one thing and you must be that one thing to the best of your ability. But actually, if you look at the original work on this by Carl Jung, he said that they're archetypes. And he was the one who popularized the term. He said that these archetypes are sets of behaviors that have been around for thousands of years, and we all have access to all of them. And so if you spend one time, let's say, being the sovereign, where everyone around you expects you to be the cold, steely-headed decision maker at all times, and you feel stuck in that position, then you might crave being the sprite. You might crave being more playful in your day-to-day life and feel like you're missing out. And so you can get burned out by just being one of those archetypes. What is important for you to expand your potential in life, expand your ability as a communicator as well, is to be able to tap into different parts of who you are. And you can start to do this by thinking, okay, today I'm actively going to be more sage-like in this conversation. I'm going to be there to offer wisdom, to speak more slowly, to do more listening. Or you can think, okay, in that meeting, I'm going to go in and be more showtime. I'm going to make sure I'm expressive. I'm going to, stand up and share my opinions and be willing to hold the spotlight. Or you can think, do you know what? I just need time to be the sprite. I'm going to go and do something today where I can be playful around other people, whether that's, calling friends that you have known since you're in high school and getting that opportunity to be playful in conversation. And by doing that, it takes us out of burnout and it reminds us, reconnects us with more of who we are. And if you can bring more of part of who you are into day-to-day life, it not only makes you feel more fulfilled, but it makes you a greater communicator to bring the part of you that you need to different meetings.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I think that's a really good thing to think about when you look at all those different archetypes, and that you can be more than one, and you need to be more than one in order to have that fulfillment. I think this is great. Richard, how can people learn more about the things that you're working on and connect with you online and pick up a copy of your book when it comes out?
Yeah, so I'm really excited that the new book, Lift Your Impact, is available for pre-order now. If people go to Amazon.com and look for Richard Newman, Lift Your Impact. You can also find me and my team for training services at ukbodytalk.com. And if you'd like to connect with me on LinkedIn, it's Richard Newman from Body Talk. I'm also on Instagram at Richard Newman Speaks.
Awesome. And I'll link that up in the show notes too, so people can find that at geekleader.com. And Richard, thanks again for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it too.
If you enjoyed that episode, please leave a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. I'd greatly appreciate that. And also, don't forget to check out merch. We have some t-shirts that I've designed that are on at geekleader.com. You can click on the merchandise section there and check that out. And also, don't forget about the books from our guests. So if you like this guest and other guests that have written books, please go ahead and check that out at geekleader.com. I would greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure they would too.